In a Minneapolis whiteout, Polar Grid CEO Adrian Vail falters as a boy arrives clutching half a compass locket. His matching half waits at home. The city was swallowed by snow. Minneapolis, once alive with the hum of traffic and light, now looked like a photograph caught in motion, a skyline half erased by white. Polar Grid's headquarters towered above the storm, its glass facade glowing through the haze like a lighthouse. Inside, Adrian Vail adjusted his dark wool coat, checked the forecast hologram one more time, and stepped into the blizzard he helped the city survive. He was the man who'd taught algorithms to feel the cold, how to predict blackouts before they happened, how to route ambulances through gridlocked storms, how to keep strangers warm. Yet tonight, his own apartment would stay cold, not for lack of heat, but of presence. The silence there had a weight that not even data could measure. As he crossed Nicollet Mall, his polished shoes crunched into drifts piled high by wind. His phone buzzed with updates from the control center, another substation near Hennepin failing under ice load. He could have stayed in the boardroom, delegated, signed orders remotely. But something about this storm called him outside, back to the city that once held his heart and then buried it under 10 winters of work. By the time he reached the riverfront, visibility was near zero. The familiar arches of the Stone Arch Bridge loomed faintly, ghost-like against the flurry. Below, the frozen Mississippi groaned under wind pressure. Adrian tightened his scarf and walked on. In his pocket rested a weathered brass half-locket, an old compass face etched with coordinates and a date. It had been Mara's idea once. When the world spins too fast, find your way back to where you began. He had kept his half, she'd kept the other, and then she'd disappeared after graduation, leaving only a short note and that December etched into metal. His driver's voice crackled through the earpiece. "Sir, the downtown warming center's lost main power. Backup generator won't sync with the grid. People are stuck inside, it's dropping fast." "I'm 5 minutes out," Adrian said. "Prep the mobile unit. I'll route manual startup." When he arrived, the scene was chaos. Dozens of people wrapped in blankets, huddled near emergency lamps flickering orange. The Polar Grid truck's logo glinted faintly through frost as engineers scrambled to reroute circuits. Adrian took off his gloves, typed rapid override commands into the field console, and barked directions with quiet precision. Then came the shout, "I need the man who built the map!" Every head turned. A small figure stumbled through the doorway. A boy, no more than 11, coat torn at the elbow, hair clotted with snow. His cheeks were raw with windburn, his breath ragged. In one hand he clutched a cracked tablet showing Polar Grid's emergency map glowing blue. In the other he held something small and gleaming, a half of a brass compass locket, its hinge split clean. "I followed your map," he gasped, voice hoarse. "It showed me the warm route, the one by the bridge. It saved us." He coughed hard, doubled over, then looked up with eyes too steady for his age. "My mom. She's sick. The shelter kicked us out when the lights went. Please, can you help her?" Adrian knelt, his tailored coat brushing melting snow. "Easy," he said, voice soft but sure. "Where is she now?" "In the alley by the old depot," the boy said. "She couldn't walk. I left her wrapped in my coat. Said I'd find the man who made the map." Adrian's gaze dropped to the compass. For a moment the storm seemed to go silent. The engraving caught the light. The same coordinates, the same December date etched on his own half. He froze. His hand went to his pocket, feeling the cold metal twin resting there. "What's your name, son?" Adrian asked quietly. "Eli," the boy said. "Eli Carter." Carter. The name landed like a forgotten song. Adrian exhaled slowly, fighting a tremor in his chest. "All right, Eli. Show me." He motioned to the medics, grabbed a thermal blanket, and followed the boy into the storm. Wind lashed their faces, the world reduced to shades of gray and white. Eli led with uncanny certainty, his tablet light bobbing like a lantern. At the mouth of the alley, the blizzard parted just enough to reveal a figure slumped against a dumpster, bundled in layers of torn fabric. Her breathing was shallow, her hair dusted with snow that refused to melt. When Adrian knelt and brushed the frost from her cheek, the years folded back in an instant. Mara. Her pulse was weak, but there. The medics rushed in, lifting her onto a stretcher, wrapping her in warming foil. Eli clung to her side, whispering, "Mom, I found him. I found the man who built the map." Adrian stood frozen, breath clouding in the air. He looked again at the compass half in Eli's small hand, then at his own trembling palm where the other half rested. The world he'd engineered to predict everything had just handed him the one variable he'd never solved: a child with his eyes, carrying his past through a storm. Outside, sirens wailed faintly against the wind as the ambulance doors shut. Adrian's voice cracked when he finally spoke. "Get her to Hennepin County Medical. Full coverage. Polar Grid account." He looked down at Eli. "You ride with her. I'll meet you there." The boy nodded, clutching the compass like it was warmth itself. When the ambulance pulled away, Adrian stood alone in the snow, the bridge looming behind him, its arches veiled by white. He took out his half-locket, opened it, and whispered to the frozen air, "Not again. Not this time." He slipped the compass back into his pocket, turned toward the glowing lights of the hospital district, and walked into the storm that had brought his son to his door. The ambulance lights blurred into red streaks against the snowfall as Adrian's black SUV followed close behind. Inside, the heater blasted, but he couldn't feel a thing. The city outside looked like a shifting maze: bridges, glass towers, and snowdrifts swirling in the headlight beams. Minneapolis was a place he'd studied in detail, modeled in data, but now it felt alien, alive with choices that no algorithm could predict. By the time he reached Hennepin County Medical Center, the storm had worsened. Snow whipped sideways, turning every street into a river of white. He flashed his credentials to security, pushed through the triage chaos, and found the emergency ward lit with the sterile hum of machines. Nurses moved briskly between cots. The smell of disinfectant and cold metal hung thick in the air. At the far end, through a glass divider, he saw the boy, Eli, sitting upright on a chair beside a hospital bed. His small hands held the compass, his thumb rubbing the edge as if it might generate heat. Beside him, under warming blankets and an oxygen line, lay Mara. Her skin was pale, her lips cracked, but her chest rose and fell, slowly, steadily. A nurse intercepted him. "Sir, she's hypothermic and severely dehydrated. Early-stage pneumonia, possible frostbite in the extremities. We're stabilizing her now." "Do whatever she needs," Adrian said quietly. "Bill, Polar Grid." The nurse paused, her expression flickering with recognition. "Polar Grid? The Winter Grid AI? You're Mr. Vale, right?" "Yes," he said. "But tonight, that doesn't matter." When the nurse left, he stepped closer to Eli. The boy's eyes darted up, wary at first. "She's going to make it," Adrian said softly. "You did the right thing bringing her here." Eli nodded. "The map showed me where the heat was, the blue line. It meant safe, right?" Adrian crouched beside him. "That's right. It's called a warm path. My team made it so no one would have to guess in storms like this." Eli hesitated. "It's the only reason we made it past the bridge. The compass pointed there too." Adrian looked at the locket again. "Where did you get that, Eli?" "It's Mom's," the boy said. "She said it belonged to someone who once promised to walk her home in a blizzard." He glanced up shyly. "Was that you?" Adrian's throat tightened. "I used to know her. A long time ago." Eli turned the compass in his palm, aligning it carefully. "She said he was smart but lonely, that he wanted to fix the whole world, so he forgot the one person who wanted to fix him." Adrian swallowed hard, watching the monitor beep steadily beside Mara's bed. For a moment, he saw her as she once was, laughing under the Stone Arch Bridge, snowflakes caught in her hair, handing him that same locket. "One half for each of us," she'd said. "So if we ever lose our way, we can still find true north." But ambition had devoured time. A startup, an IPO, the endless chase for precision. He'd chosen control over connection and lost her to silence. Eli's voice broke his thoughts. Mom says we don't need much, just a place that's warm enough to sleep through the night. You have that now, Adrian said gently. The boy looked down. It won't last. Nothing ever does. Adrian wanted to argue, to promise something absolute, but he'd lived too many years knowing promises could fracture under pressure. Instead, he asked, "Do you trust me to try?" Eli studied him, those ice-blue eyes so familiar it almost hurt. Then, slowly, he nodded. Moments later, a doctor entered. Dr. Lee, middle-aged, brisk, competent. "Mr. Vale," he said, glancing at the tablet. "We've confirmed pneumonia, but caught it early. She needs oxygen, fluids, antibiotics. She's lucky your boy here acted fast." Eli blushed faintly. "She told me to wait until sunrise, but the map said we couldn't." "The map saved you both," the doctor said with quiet admiration before turning to Adrian. "Are you family?" Adrian hesitated. "Not legally," he said after a beat, "but I'd like to cover full care and we'll need next of kin information." Dr. Lee interrupted. "Birth records, emergency contacts." Eli's head tilted. "We don't have any family," he said softly. "Mom said it's just us." The words landed heavier than any storm. Adrian signed the authorization forms, left his card, and stepped into the hallway, gripping the compass so tightly it left a mark in his palm. Outside the ward, he called his head of operations, Natalie. "Get a private investigator. Quietly. I need background on Mara Carter, address history, employment, hospital files from the past decade. And I want you to trace any correspondence or legal documentation involving her name and mine." "Understood," she said, confusion in her tone. "Sir, what are we looking for exactly?" "The truth," Adrian said simply. When he hung up, he leaned against the cold wall and exhaled. The storm outside hammered against the windows, wind howling like it remembered him. Back in the room, Eli had fallen asleep on a chair beside his mother, his fingers still wrapped around the compass. Adrian stepped closer, brushed the snow from the boy's hair, and whispered almost to himself, "You shouldn't have had to be this brave." He sat in silence for a long time, watching the two of them breathe, until the monitor's rhythm steadied into something like hope. And when the first pale light of morning filtered through the frost-coated glass, Adrian realized he wasn't leaving. Not this time. By morning, the blizzard had calmed to a steady hush. Minneapolis lay wrapped in a blanket of silver, cars half buried, the skyline glinting faintly under a pale sun. Inside Hennepin County Medical Center, the warmth hummed low and constant, the kind that melts the edges of fear without you realizing it. Adrian sat in the corridor, tie loosened, coat draped over the chair beside him. The empty coffee cup in his hand had long gone cold. Across the glass partition, he watched Mara sleep, oxygen mask fogging slightly with each breath. Eli lay curled in the cot beside her, hand still resting on the blanket near hers. He had spent the night replaying every fragment of memory. College winters, long coding sessions in the campus library, the night she'd stood on the Stone Arch Bridge and said, "You can't program the heart, Adrian." He hadn't understood then. He did now. The sound of footsteps broke his reverie. Natalie Chen, his operations chief, approached. Parka, still dusted with snow, tablet in hand. "I got what you asked for," she said, lowering her voice. "You were right to dig." He stood, his muscles stiff from hours in the same position. "Tell me." She glanced toward the patient room before continuing. "Your former chief of staff, David Lang, had correspondence rerouted through a private security firm during your IPO year. Anything personal that looked like potential risk was flagged and withheld. That included multiple certified letters from a Mara Carter. One dated February of that year. She said she was pregnant and wanted to meet before you left for New York." Adrian's pulse spiked. "You're certain?" I've seen the scans, Natalie said, swiping through the tablet. The originals were never logged. They were sent to your old office address, but Lang intercepted them. He told legal they were unsolicited personal threats. He covered his tracks with a fake risk memo. Adrian clenched his jaw. He buried her to protect my image. Natalie nodded grimly. I also pulled hospital records from the date etched on your locket, December 12th, 11 years ago. A birth certificate for an Eli Carter. The father's line reads, "Not listed," but the attending physician's billing notes mention an anonymous donor covering delivery and recovery costs. The payment came from a shell account tied to, guess who, Polar Grid's IPO escrow. He closed his eyes. Lang, he murmured. Natalie's expression softened. She never tried to take anything from you, Adrian. She just wanted you to know. He sank back into the chair, elbows on his knees, the compass half cold in his palm. And I built a company on the lie that I could predict every outcome. Natalie hesitated. What do you want me to do? Contact legal. Quietly prepare a parental verification. If the results confirm what I already know, I'll take it from there. She nodded, then paused at the doorway. For what it's worth, sir, he looks like you, especially when he's trying to be brave. When she was gone, Adrian sat still for a long moment, staring at his reflection in the glass. The man who looked back was powerful, composed, and suddenly small. Inside the room, Eli stirred awake. Adrian rose and opened the door softly. "Morning," he said. Eli rubbed his eyes, yawning. "Is Mom okay?" "She's resting," Adrian said. "The doctors say she's strong. You did more than most grown men could have done out there." Eli shrugged, embarrassed. "I just followed the map." Adrian smiled faintly. "Maps are only as good as the heart of the one following them." Eli tilted his head. "You talk like my mom. She says the compass doesn't point north. It points home." Adrian's breath caught. "She said that to me once, too." Eli reached into his pocket and took out the locket. "It's missing the other half," he said. "She told me it was broken the night she left college. That's why she never looks back when she walks. She says part of her already did." He turned it over and traced the engraving with his thumb. "What do these numbers mean?" Adrian crouched beside him, the hospital's light catching the faint brass gleam. "They're coordinates, to the bridge where we met." "The stone arch?" He nodded. "Yes. It was snowing that night, too." The boy looked down again, thoughtful. "Do you still have the other half?" Adrian hesitated. Then, slowly, he reached into his inner pocket and pulled out his piece. The same curve, the same wear, the same inscription. Eli's eyes widened. "You do," he whispered. "It's real." Adrian held both halves near each other, the edges almost touching but not yet aligned. "I didn't know there was more to the story," he said quietly. "I thought I'd lost it all. Turns out I just wasn't looking in the right direction." The boy studied him for a long moment. "You look sad." "I'm sorry," Adrian said softly, "for not being there when you needed me, for not even knowing." Eli didn't respond. He just reached out and gently pushed the two halves together. They didn't lock. One hinge bent, one edge cracked, but they fit. Imperfectly. Beautifully. Adrian swallowed hard. "You remind me of her," he said. The doctor entered then, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Vale, we'll need consent for further testing if you're intending to—" Adrian nodded. "I'll sign everything. I want confirmation, officially." The doctor looked from him to the boy, then back again. "It'll take less than a day." As the paperwork settled, Adrian lingered by the window. Outside, the city was beginning to move again. Snowplows carving slow channels, sunlight bouncing off rooftops. It felt like something breaking open, not violently, but inevitably. That evening, as dusk fell over the frozen river, he returned to the hospital chapel, an old stone room lit by stained glass and candlelight. The faint image of a shepherd cradling a lost lamb glowed red and gold against the wall. Adrian sat in the front pew, the compass halves resting on his palm, whispering to no one in particular, "There's a way back. Show me how to walk it." And somewhere beyond the silence, the storm that had brought him to this moment began to fade, leaving only the sound of distant sirens and a heartbeat steadying behind glass doors. The chapel stayed dim long after visiting hours ended. Adrian didn't pray. He'd never learned how, but he sat there as though waiting for something greater than data, something that couldn't be measured. The candlelight flickered across the brass locket halves in his palm. They looked like two pieces of time that had refused to stop searching for each other. Outside, the storm had softened into a hush. Snow drifted gently across the frozen Mississippi, coating the bridges in fragile lace. The city's rhythm slowed, as if the world itself were catching its breath. When he finally left the chapel, the hallways were almost empty. Nurses spoke in low voices. The intercom hummed softly above the sound of monitors. He stopped by Mara's room one more time. Eli was half asleep in the chair, chin resting on his knees. The glow from the monitor cast pale light across his face. He looked so small, and yet something in his posture, the stillness, reminded Adrian of his own childhood nights after his father's long absences. Adrian pulled a blanket over the boy's shoulders, then sat down beside the bed. Mara's breathing was steadier now, her pulse firm under the IV lines. For the first time since that night on the bridge years ago, he spoke to her aloud. "I thought leaving would make things cleaner," he said quietly. "That ambition would fill what love left empty. But the truth is, Mara, I didn't walk away. I froze." Her eyelids fluttered faintly at the sound of his voice. Whether she heard him or dreamed it, he didn't know. He took out the compass again, turned it over, and read the faintly worn engraving. 44, 97 and 8 degree. 93 or 25 degrees to W, December 12th, the coordinates of the Stone Arch Bridge. The night they'd first kissed, when snow clung to her hair and she'd said, laughing, "If you ever get lost, promise you'll follow this back." He had followed data, not the compass, and it had brought him here, back to her, but through loss. The next morning his phone buzzed before dawn. A text from Natalie. DNA confirmed, 99.9%. He sat there motionless for a long time, staring at the screen. No shock, no disbelief, just a slow wave of truth washing through him, both heavy and freeing. When he finally looked up, light was creeping through the blinds. The hospital windows glowed faintly gold as the sun broke over the skyline. Adrian slipped the phone into his coat and stood. He needed air. Outside, the world was raw and clean. The plows had carved narrow corridors through the drifts, and steam rose from the storm grates in twisting ribbons. He walked without direction, boots crunching through snow, until he reached the bridge. The stone arch stood exactly as it had a decade ago, arched and strong, rimed with frost echoing the sound of the frozen river below. He leaned on the railing, breath forming clouds that faded into the pale morning light. The memory of Mara's laughter rose in him like a tide he couldn't stop. He saw her again in his mind, auburn hair caught by the wind, hands clasped around a steaming paper cup. "You always check the forecast before you check your own heart," she'd teased. And she'd been right. He'd planned everything: markets, weather, infrastructure, but not the possibility of a child who would one day find him in the snow. The sound of footsteps behind him drew him back. He turned to see Eli trudging up the bridge, bundled in his hospital jacket, breath misting in the cold. "You shouldn't be out here," Adrian said gently. "It's freezing." Eli shrugged. "The nurse said Mom's still sleeping. I wanted to see where you and she met." Adrian smiled faintly. "You found it." The boy walked to the edge, peering over at the ice below. "She said the bridge made her feel small, but safe. Like the world was big enough for second chances." He pulled something from his pocket, the half locket, and held it out. "You can keep it until she wakes up. I think it's supposed to be yours too." Adrian hesitated before accepting it. "You trust me with it?" Eli nodded. Mom says people who follow the right paths don't need perfect maps. The words hit deeper than any apology could. They stood together in silence, watching the river. A flock of geese crossed overhead, their wings cutting dark shapes against the lightening sky. Somewhere in the city behind them, the Polar Grid headquarters gleamed faintly through the morning fog. Adrian broke the quiet first. "When I was your age," he said, "I thought success meant never being cold again." He glanced down at the compass in his hand. "But warmth isn't about temperature. It's about who's beside you." Eli looked up at him with cautious curiosity. "Do you think Mom will be okay?" "She's strong," Adrian said. "Stronger than I ever understood." "Will you stay?" the boy asked, his voice small but steady. Adrian's answer came without hesitation. "Yes, I will." They stood there a while longer until the first snowflakes began to fall again, gentle this time, light as forgiveness. When they returned to the hospital, Mara was awake. Her eyes were tired, rimmed with the faint violet of recovery, but when she saw them, she smiled. "You found the bridge," she whispered. Eli ran to her side, gripping her hand. "He was already there." Her gaze met Adrian's across the bed. Years of hurt and love and disbelief folding into a single, silent exchange. She didn't ask for proof. She already knew. He reached into his coat pocket, set the compass halves side by side on her blanket, and said softly, "The coordinates still work." Mara blinked back tears, her lips trembling into a fragile smile. "Then maybe it's time we follow them home." Outside, the hospital windows caught the sun, and for the first time in a long time, winter looked like a beginning instead of an ending. For the first time in 11 years, Mara Carter's hospital room was filled with light that didn't come from machines. Morning sun spilled through the half-frosted window, touching her face, her hair, the faint freckles he still remembered tracing when they were young and invincible. She was thinner now, her hands roughened from years of work and cold, but her eyes, those gray-green eyes that could see right through his armor, hadn't changed. She stirred as Adrian stepped closer, careful not to wake Eli, who had finally fallen asleep in the armchair, his head buried under a folded hospital blanket. The boy's compass rested in his open palm, the chain looped around his wrist. Mara's lips moved before her eyes opened. "Still chasing storms?" The sound of her voice nearly undid him. Adrian managed a smile. "Only the ones I caused." She opened her eyes fully, studying him as if she were measuring the distance between the man she remembered and the one standing before her now. "You look the same," she said faintly. "A little colder, maybe. A little more sure of what doesn't matter." He took a quiet breath. "I didn't know, Mara. About him. About any of it. I swear I didn't." She blinked slowly, her expression unreadable. "I believe you," she said at last. "I stopped blaming you a long time ago. Blame's too heavy to carry when you're just trying to keep a child warm." He sat down at the edge of the bed. "What happened after you left campus?" She looked toward the window, snowlight glinting in her eyes. "I was scared. You were about to launch Polar Grid. I knew what that meant. Investors, headlines, scrutiny, and then I found out I was pregnant." Her voice faltered. "I wrote you. I sent the letters. They said they were returned." Adrian nodded slowly, guilt rippling through him. "They never reached me. Lang, my chief of staff, intercepted them. He told the board any personal complications could kill our IPO. He called it protecting me." "Protecting you," she repeated softly. "By erasing us." He looked down. "I didn't find out until yesterday." She was silent for a long time, listening to the rhythm of the heart monitor. "There were nights," she said finally, "when I thought maybe you knew and just didn't want to be found." "I would have come," he said, his voice rough, "no matter what it cost me." She turned back toward him, her tone gentle but steady. "The cost wasn't the point, Adrian. You can rebuild money. You can't rebuild years." He didn't argue. He couldn't. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and set the compass halves on the blanket between them. They were never really apart, he said. Just waiting. Her gaze softened and she reached out, fingertips brushing the joined metal. You kept yours? Every day, he said. It was the one thing I couldn't throw away. The door creaked open then. Eli stirred awake and blinked at the two of them. Mom? Mara smiled weakly. Hey, baby, look who stayed. The boy's face brightened as he scrambled from the chair to her side. Adrian watched him tuck the blanket closer around her and instinctively reach for her hand. The gesture was small but instinctive, protective. He'd missed 11 years of these little moments, and each one felt like a cut. Dr. Lee says you'll need a few more days, Adrian said. After that, you can move to a recovery suite. Quiet, private, near the river. Mara frowned. That sounds expensive. It's covered, he said simply. No strings. Just care. Her eyes flickered with unease. You don't owe me that. I owe him, Adrian replied, nodding toward Eli. And you? For surviving what I didn't even know I'd lost. She looked down, tracing the edge of the blanket. Eli's had to be strong his whole life. Too strong, sometimes. Adrian crouched so he was eye level with the boy. Hey, Eli, he said softly. You like puzzles? Eli shrugged. Sometimes. This one's simple, Adrian said, holding out his half of the compass again. If we fix this, the two pieces will click back together. I think it should stay that way. Eli studied him, suspicion melting into curiosity. You can really fix it? Adrian smiled. I build systems that survive blizzards. I can handle a hinge. The boy's lips twitched into the smallest grin. Okay. But you have to promise not to lose it again. I promise, Adrian said quietly. That night, Mara drifted in and out of sleep while Eli played with the hospital's digital tablet beside her bed, tracing lines across a city map. This is your app, right? He asked. The one with all the blue lines? Adrian nodded. Those are safe paths, routes to heat and shelter during power loss. But the system isn't perfect. We're still trying to cover the riverfront. Eli tapped the screen with small, sure hands. I can help. I walked those streets last night. I know where the wind hurts most. The boy's words landed softly but struck deep. Adrian glanced at Mara, who was half awake, watching them. Her lips curved faintly, exhaustion giving way to something almost peaceful. See, she murmured, you always said maps couldn't feel, but maybe they can if you let the right hands draw them. When the nurse dimmed the lights, the three of them sat in the quiet silhouette against the snow. The wind outside rattled the window, but inside, warmth pooled in small human ways. A mother breathing easier, a boy safe for the first time in days, and a man who had finally found what every forecast had missed, his true north. And as Adrian looked at the faint outline of the repaired compass on the nightstand, he whispered to himself, Tomorrow, we start rebuilding. 2 days later, the sky over Minneapolis turned brittle blue, the kind of cold that cracked sound itself. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape sculpted in ice. Hospital windows glittered like mirrors as the city crawled back to life, plows rumbling down Hennepin, buses grinding over salt-streaked streets, people moving fast to forget how close the cold had come. Inside, Adrian stood at the window of the private recovery suite he'd arranged. Warm wood tones, soft lighting, a view of the frozen Mississippi bending toward the Stone Arch Bridge. Mara slept again, her breathing calm but shallow, IV line steady. Eli sat cross-legged at a small table near the heater, sketching a map on a notepad. Each line he drew corresponded to something real: bridge corners, alleyways, the spots where wind cut deepest. He'd marked them with stars, arrows, and notes like "Don't stop here," "It echoes too much," and "Dog shelter equals warm air vent." Adrian watched, half in awe. You remember all that? He asked quietly. Eli nodded. You hear the city differently when you don't have anywhere to be. The words stung. Adrian turned toward the window again, voice low. You shouldn't have had to know any of that. Mara's voice, soft but awake now, drifted from the bed. He learned because he had to. Adrian turned, startled. Her eyes were open, calm but watchful. How long have you been listening? Long enough to know you blame yourself for everything, she said. That's not how this works. I could have stopped it, he said. Lang, the lies, the silence. I built a company to predict disasters, and I couldn't even see my own life collapsing. Mara gave a faint smile. You always thought fixing the world meant controlling it. Sometimes fixing means just being there when it breaks. He sat on the chair beside her bed. You deserved more than letters returned unopened. She looked out toward the river. There was a time when I used to hate you for that, she said. Then Eli got pneumonia when he was 5. I spent the night in a shelter stairwell, holding him while he shivered, and I realized hate didn't make him warmer, it just made me colder. Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't cry. So, I stopped waiting for rescue. I taught him how to read wind, how to listen for generators, how to follow warmth. We made our own map. Adrian leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You shouldn't have had to. No one should, she said simply. But people fall through cracks, even in your system, even in your city. That truth sat between them, heavier than blame. After a moment, Mara changed the subject. What happens now? You've got your company, your name, your life. We don't fit into that world. Adrian met her gaze. You do now, both of you. She frowned. Adrian, I'm not talking about headlines or image, he interrupted. I mean safety, stability, a home, no cameras, no press, just time. She shook her head faintly. And what happens when your board decides this is a liability? When they tell you that a single mother and a kid who came in from the snow are bad optics? He hesitated. Then I'll remind them what Polar Grid stands for. Profit? She asked, a trace of the old fire in her tone. Survival, he said softly, and not just mine anymore. Eli looked up from his notebook. Can I show you something? Adrian nodded, grateful for the interruption. The boy turned the page around. It was a hand-drawn grid of the city, marked with red and blue routes. If you connect the heat stations here and here, he said, you can make a loop. People wouldn't have to walk as far. Adrian studied the drawing. That's brilliant. Eli shrugged. It's just logic. You follow warmth, not distance. He smiled faintly. That's better logic than most of my engineers use. Mara's lips curved in quiet amusement. You should hire him. Adrian turned to her. I might. But beneath the small warmth of their exchange, something darker coiled. He knew this peace was fragile. Lang was still out there, and the moment the truth surfaced, Eli, Mara, the forged paperwork, someone would weaponize it. That night, when Mara and Eli finally slept, Adrian stepped out into the hallway and called Natalie. Status? He asked. Not good, she said. Lang caught wind of the investigation. He's been calling board members, framing it like a personal scandal. Claims Mara tried to blackmail you years ago and you're covering for her. Adrian's jaw tightened. Get me proof he intercepted the letters. Anything. We're digging, Natalie said, but you need to prepare. Once the DNA results hit the record, this won't stay private. He leaned against the wall, the weight of inevitability pressing hard against his ribs. Then we go public on our own terms, he said finally. No spin, no PR team, just truth. Are you sure? She asked quietly. This could tank Polar Grid's stock. Investors hate emotional stories. Adrian looked through the glass door at Mara and Eli sleeping side by side, their hands almost touching. They'll hate losing their humanity more, he said. He hung up and returned to the room. The snow outside had stopped completely. The city lights reflected off the river like stars scattered across the ice. He stood there for a long moment, watching the slow rhythm of their breathing, the quiet that felt like the first hour after a storm, the fragile kind, full of possibility and dread. In his pocket, the repaired compass clicked softly when he turned it in his hand. It pointed north, but somehow, for the first time, he didn't need it to know where home was. The next morning began with the sterile chill of routine. Nurses making rounds, the rhythmic beep of monitors, the faint hiss of the ventilator. But, for Adrian Vale, the world had shifted in a way that couldn't be undone. He stood before the mirror in the recovery suite's small restroom, steam curling faintly from the sink. His reflection looked immaculate as always. Crisp white shirt, tailored vest, expensive watch gleaming under fluorescent light. But the man staring back seemed hollow, not from lack of sleep, but from realizing that for years he'd lived behind a glass wall, transparent yet unreachable. He adjusted his tie, then stopped halfway, staring at his own hands. The same hands that had coded Polar Grid's core algorithm. The same ones that had signed off on emergency budgets and million-dollar sponsorships. Hands that had built warmth for a city, but never held his own child until 3 nights ago. A soft knock broke through his thoughts. "Come in," he said. Eli stepped in, balancing a hospital tray awkwardly in both hands. "The nurse said you didn't eat breakfast." Adrian smiled faintly. "So, you brought me mystery oatmeal?" Eli grinned. "With extra sugar packets. Don't tell Dr. Lee." The boy set the tray down on the table, proud of his small victory. He had that quiet confidence, an engineer's precision mixed with a child's wonder that Adrian recognized all too well. "You're up early," Adrian said. "I couldn't sleep," Eli admitted. "The lights hum different in hospitals, like they're thinking." Adrian chuckled softly. "You hear that too?" Eli nodded, serious now. "Mom says I listen like you do, when I don't talk much." Adrian looked at him for a long moment. "She's right." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Outside, the city shimmered under ice, the skyline glittering like cut glass. Then, Adrian's phone buzzed on the table. A message from Natalie. "Lang, press release. Claims Polar Grid funds illegally diverted to cover personal affair. Media alert in 30 minutes. His chest went cold. "Excuse me a moment, Eli," he said gently, stepping toward the corner. He called Natalie. "Talk to me. He's leaking doctored invoices and a fake non-disclosure agreement. The story's everywhere. Financial Review, Globe Wire, local news feeds, all running with Tech CEO's secret family. He's playing it like you embezzled from Polar Grid to support Mara." Adrian closed his eyes, forcing control into his voice. "And the board?" "Panicking," she said. "Some of them want you to issue a denial. Distance yourself until they verify facts." He looked toward the bed where Mara rested, pale but stronger, and the small figure of Eli sitting quietly with his spoon. "I'm done hiding behind denials," he said. "Schedule a press conference at headquarters. Noon." "Adrian, that's—" "No spin," he interrupted. "I'll speak myself." He hung up before she could protest. When he turned back, Eli was watching him, expression unreadable. "Something bad?" Adrian crouched beside him, lowering his voice. "Some people don't like when others tell the truth. They twist it to make you look small. But the truth always wins if you stand still long enough." The boy nodded slowly. "Mom says storms don't last forever, just long enough to show who's standing." Adrian smiled faintly. "She's wise." "She's scared," Eli said softly. "She thinks you'll leave." That stopped him cold. "Did she say that?" Eli shook his head. "She didn't have to." Adrian sat down beside him, shoulders heavy with something deeper than guilt. "I left once," he said. "It was the worst mistake of my life. I won't do it again." The boy studied him carefully, as if testing for truth. Then he asked the question Adrian wasn't ready for. "Are you my dad?" The words were simple, but they cracked something open inside him. He took a long breath. "Yes, Eli," he said softly. "I am." The boy didn't move for a moment. Then he leaned forward and wrapped his small arms around Adrian's neck, wordless, trembling. Adrian held him tightly, the weight of 11 years collapsing into that single, silent embrace. When they finally pulled apart, Eli whispered, "You found us in the snow." Adrian smiled faintly through the ache in his throat. "No, son. You found me." Hours later, Polar Grid headquarters buzzed with tension. The press room filled with reporters, the storm of flashbulbs reflected in the glass walls that lined the atrium. Investors murmured near the back, faces tight. Screens behind the podium flashed Polar Grid's logo, a swirling blue map of the city, glowing with heat corridors. Natalie met him backstage. "This could go either way," she warned. "It's already gone the only way that matters," he said. "Forward." When he stepped up to the microphone, the noise stilled. Cameras clicked, pens poised. "My name is Adrian Vale," he began. "I'm the founder and CEO of Polar Grid AI. You've read the headlines today, some of them true, most of them not. But I owe you, and this city, one honest story." He paused, scanning the faces before him. "Years ago, a woman I loved sent me letters I never received. Those letters told me I had a son. Because of deceit, my own negligence and someone else's ambition, I didn't learn the truth until a blizzard nearly cost both of them their lives. That boy's name is Eli. His mother's name is Mara. They are the reason Polar Grid exists in the first place." The room rippled with whispers. "I didn't steal from this company," Adrian continued. "I built it to ensure no one else would ever freeze in the dark the way they almost did. If that cost me my title, then fine, but I won't apologize for choosing humanity over optics." His voice steadied. "From this day forward, Polar Grid will redirect 10% of its winter profit margins to emergency shelter expansion and heat access mapping, because survival shouldn't depend on status." A murmur of surprise and awe moved through the crowd. Cameras flashed again, not with scandal this time, but with something closer to respect. When he stepped away from the podium, Natalie caught his arm. "You just rewrote the story," she whispered. "Not yet," he said, "but maybe we started the right chapter." Back at the hospital, Mara watched the press conference replay on the small TV. Eli sat beside her, eyes wide. When Adrian's voice echoed through the speaker, "His name is Eli," the boy smiled for the first time in days. Mara turned to him, her expression soft. "He didn't run." Eli nodded. "He said he wouldn't." Outside, snow began to fall again, light and slow. The storm was over, but winter had finally learned to feel warm. That night, Minneapolis looked like glass and fire, a city reflected in its own thaw. The snow no longer screamed against the windows but drifted softly, forgivingly. Polar Grid's rooftop lights shimmered in the distance, and beneath them life stirred again. Shelters reopening. City buses moving along cleared routes, heat maps glowing brighter on phones across the skyline. In the quiet hospital suite, Adrian sat beside Mara's bed as the muted replay of his press conference ended. The screen went dark, leaving their reflections faintly visible in the glass. Two faces changed by years of silence, now forced to see what remained. "I watched you," Mara said quietly, her voice rough from rest and tears. "You didn't flinch?" "I've flinched for 11 years, Adrian replied. "It was time to stop." Her gaze lingered on him. "You realize you just set fire to your boardroom." He gave a faint, weary smile. "Then maybe it's about time we build something new in the ashes." Eli stirred awake on the couch, rubbing his eyes. "Was that really on TV?" he mumbled. Adrian nodded. "Every channel in the state." The boy blinked, processing it slowly. "So, everyone knows I'm your kid?" "Yes," Adrian said carefully. "But they don't get to define what that means. That's ours." Eli looked uncertain. "Mom always said fame's like a blizzard. Pretty until it buries you." "She's right," Adrian said, meeting Mara's eyes. "That's why I promised there'd be no cameras near you again. The world will move on to its next storm soon enough." Mara sat up slightly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "And when they don't? When your investors start calling?" "They already have," he admitted. "Half the board resigned this afternoon. The rest want me to temporarily step aside while the company reviews the funding structure for the shelters." Her expression tightened. "They want you to disappear?" He shrugged. "They can try." Eli frowned, folding his arms. "But you built Polar Grid." "That's not what matters anymore," Adrian said gently. "If I lose the company, I'll build another one. What matters is what it does now, how many people it keeps warm next time the grid fails." He turned to Mara. "I'm done living for headlines." She studied him for a long moment, searching for something real behind the words. "You sound like the man I used to love," she said softly. He met her gaze steadily. Maybe he finally caught up. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of years, regret, and the fragile possibility of forgiveness. After a while, Eli broke it with the blunt directness only a child could manage. "Can we go outside tomorrow? I want to show you where I used to sleep before the warming center opened." Mara's eyes darkened. "Eli, it's okay, Mom," he said quickly. "He should know." Adrian nodded solemnly. "I'd like that." The next morning, the three of them bundled in heavy coats and stepped out into the crystalline world. Sunlight glared off snowbanks, buses hissed along salted roads, and the air smelled clean, metal and pine. Eli led the way with the confidence of someone who'd mapped the city in survival, not luxury. He pointed out alleys and corners where wind pooled and heat vents hid. "Here's where I slept when it was really bad," he said, stopping beside a steam grate near the Nicollet underpass. "It's loud, but warm." Mara looked away, her hand tightening around her scarf. Adrian knelt beside the grate, steam fogging his glasses. "You memorize this?" Eli nodded. "You learn fast when you have to." Adrian swallowed the ache rising in his chest. "You shouldn't have had to." Eli shrugged. "Lots of kids do." Adrian stood, jaw set. "Not anymore. Not if I can help it." As they continued walking, they crossed the stretch of riverfront where the old warming center had lost power, the one where Eli had burst in shouting for the man who built the map. The building still stood, boarded up but echoing faintly in the wind. "Is this where you found us?" Mara asked. Adrian nodded. "Right there. You were half buried under that awning." She turned toward the spot, eyes misting. "I don't remember much. Just cold." And Eli's voice. "He never stopped moving," Adrian said softly. "He kept pulling that broken cart across the ice. Said your compass told him to keep going." Mara touched the repaired locket at her neck. "It wasn't the compass," she said quietly. "It was faith. I told him the man who walked me home once would find his way back eventually." Adrian met her eyes, heart twisting. "You still believed that?" "Even when I stopped believing in everything else," she whispered. The sun broke through the clouds then, reflecting off the snow in blinding brilliance. Adrian took the compass from his pocket, their halves now fused, hinge polished smooth. The inscription gleamed faintly beneath the light. Eli noticed and grinned. "It works now." "It does," Adrian said, "but it doesn't point north anymore." "Where does it point?" the boy asked. Adrian smiled. "Home." They stood there for a while, wind curling around them, the hum of distant traffic blending with the faint creak of the bridge above. For the first time in years, Adrian didn't feel like he was standing between two worlds, corporate and human, logic and love. He felt centered, present, whole. That evening, as dusk fell, he received a call from Natalie. "Adrian, the fallout's stabilizing. Public sentiment's flipped. People are calling your speech the most human moment tech has ever had. The mayor wants to meet about expanding the heat path network across the Midwest." He exhaled in disbelief. "They're actually listening?" "For once," she said. "You made them feel something they couldn't measure." After the call, he turned to find Mara and Eli on the balcony, watching the skyline glow against the snow. Mara leaned against the railing, the boy's head resting on her shoulder. When she looked back at Adrian, her expression was soft but uncertain. "You sure you want to carry this with us?" she asked quietly. The storms, the eyes, the weight? He walked over, slipped the compass chain around both her and Eli's wrists, binding them gently together. We'll carry it, he said, together this time. And, for the first time since that December long ago, Mara didn't look afraid of winter. A week later, Minneapolis thawed in slow motion. Ice peeled from street signs, gutters trickled again, and the Mississippi, black and cold, shifted beneath its brittle shell. The city was alive with the kind of quiet hope that comes after nearly freezing to death. Adrian walked up the narrow staircase of a 2-story brownstone overlooking the river. It wasn't grand, no marble floors, no smart mirrors, but it was warm, the kind of warm that comes from life inside, not thermostats. This would be their new home, a temporary lease under Mara's name, private and small, with windows that faced the Stone Arch Bridge. Eli darted between rooms, his excitement tangible. "This one!" he shouted, racing into the smaller bedroom where sunlight spilled across the hardwood floor. "It has a view of the bridge." Adrian smiled faintly. "You sure you don't want the bigger one?" Eli shook his head. "Nope. This one's closer to the river. You can hear it crack at night." Mara stepped in behind them, wrapped in her wool coat, color returned to her face at last. She ran her fingers along the window pane, tracing the faint condensation. "You remembered," she said softly. Adrian turned toward her. "You once said the bridge made you feel small, but safe. I thought maybe you could feel that again." Her eyes glistened. "I don't know what to say." He smiled. "Then don't. Just live here. Heal here." She hesitated, glancing around. "It feels like a promise." "It is," he said simply. Later that afternoon, after helping Mara settle her medication and groceries, Adrian found Eli sitting cross-legged in the living room, drawing on a wide sheet of paper taped to the floor. Crayons and pencils surrounded him like tools of an engineer in training. "What's that?" Adrian asked, kneeling beside him. "The new map," Eli said, "for the North Star rooms." Adrian frowned slightly. "You remember that?" The boy nodded. "From your speech. You said you'd build warm places that never close. I think I figured out how to connect them." He held up the drawing. It was a child's rendering, uneven and colorful, but brilliant in concept. Instead of straight lines, Eli had drawn curved heat paths around the city's coldest zones, like arteries rerouting blood around frostbite. Each node, labeled church, bus stop, old mall, had notes beside it. Don't close during snow, volunteers equals blankets, kids' room. Adrian stared at the map, genuinely stunned. This could work. Eli grinned. "I told you, warmth follows people, not buildings." Mara leaned against the doorway, watching them. "He gets that from you," she said softly. Adrian turned to her. "No, he gets that from both of us." For the first time, the silence between them felt easy. That evening, Adrian excused himself to take a call from Natalie. "We've confirmed Lang's indictment," she said briskly. "Fraud, evidence tampering, obstruction. The DA's office says your testimony sealed it." Adrian didn't gloat. "He'll have to live with what he broke." "He's already out of Polar Grid," Natalie said. "The board voted to dissolve the old leadership. They're offering you an option, to return as CEO under a social mission clause. They want to rebuild the company's image through your project." Adrian paused, glancing through the window at Eli curled on the rug, Mara brewing tea in the small kitchen. "Tell them I'll come back," he said finally. "But under new terms." "What terms?" Natalie asked. "Profit won't come first anymore. Every winter, 10% of our surplus goes to North Star rooms. And the first design lead?" He smiled faintly. "Eli Carter." Natalie chuckled softly. "He'll like that." After the call, Adrian returned to the living room. Where Eli was asleep beside his half-finished map, crayons scattered like tiny constellations. Mara sat on the couch, mug in hand, her gaze soft but distant. "He's dreaming," she said quietly. "He talked about snow in his sleep when he was little. He said it sounded like paper ripping. Adrian knelt, gently covering Eli with a blanket. He won't have to hear that sound again. Mara sipped her tea. You really mean to rebuild Polar Grid around this, don't you? He nodded. If a company can't protect the people who walk its streets, it doesn't deserve to exist. She studied him. You've changed. I hope so, he said, but I'm still learning how to live without running. Mara smiled faintly. That's all any of us do. Try again. Later, after Eli was tucked in, they stood together on the balcony overlooking the frozen river. The bridge shimmered under lamplight, the arches glowing faintly gold. I used to think success meant distance, Adrian said. From pain, from mistakes, from everything that could slow you down. And now? She asked. He turned toward her, his breath visible in the cold. Now, I think it means staying, even when it hurts. Mara met his gaze, her eyes catching the light from the city below. You stayed, she said softly. I will, he promised. They stood there in silence until a gust of wind sent a swirl of snow past their faces. Mara laughed quietly, the sound pure and alive. You know, she said, Eli's right about one thing. The river does talk at night. What does it say? He asked. She smiled. That winter doesn't end. It changes shape. Down below, the city lights flickered, bright, steady, resilient. Inside, the compass sat on the coffee table between two mugs of tea, its needle quivering gently before pointing not north, but toward the room where a boy slept warm for the first time in years. The following Monday dawned brittle and bright. The city still shimmered under frost, but the river moved again, slow, black ribbons carving through white. From the window of the brownstone, Adrian watched sunlight scatter over the Mississippi, his reflection faint in the glass. The air smelled like cedar and coffee, like something beginning. He was due at Polar Grid headquarters in an hour. His reinstatement wasn't official yet, just a vote, a formality, but the headlines had changed tone overnight. Vail's North Star Initiative gains momentum. Public rallies behind CEO who put people before profit. Eli padded into the kitchen in socks, hair messy, rubbing sleep from his eyes. You're wearing the suit again, he said, stifling a yawn. Adrian smiled faintly. Some habits die hard. Mara appeared behind him, mug in hand. He means you look like you're going to war. In a way, Adrian said, adjusting his cufflinks. But this time, I know what I'm fighting for. Eli climbed onto a stool. You'll win. Adrian tousled his hair. I've already won, he said softly. Mara watched him, silent but thoughtful. You don't have to do this, she said. You could walk away, build something new without them. He met her gaze. That would be easy. But every system I built once left people in the cold. If I leave now, nothing changes. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Then don't fight alone. An hour later, Adrian stood once more in Polar Grid's glass atrium. Sunlight spilled across the marble floors, the reflection of snow still visible beyond the panoramic windows. Employees paused mid-stride as he entered, whispers trailing behind him. At the far end of the lobby, a small group of reporters waited near the boardroom doors, restrained by security. His assistant, Natalie, met him halfway. They're nervous, she said in a low voice. Some shareholders still think this humanitarian pivot is bad business. Adrian arched a brow. Then it's time to remind them business dies without humanity. Inside, the boardroom buzzed with quiet tension. Men and women in tailored suits sat stiffly around the long glass table. Their faces a mixture of admiration, uncertainty, and fear of market backlash. The chairman cleared his throat. Mr. Vail, your public statements caused disruption. Investors demand clarity. Are we a tech company or a social foundation? Adrian's voice was calm. Both. Because if we build tools that save power but not people, we've already failed. One director frowned. You're proposing to divert profits, 10%, to what you're calling North Star rooms. That's millions in operational funds. Adrian nodded. Exactly. That 10% will save lives during grid failures, create jobs for technicians, and rebuild community trust in our systems. It's not charity. It's resilience. A pause. Then another voice. And this child, the one the media's calling your son. Adrian met the question head on. Eli. Yes, he's my son. His story is why this matters. He used our map to survive a blizzard we should have prevented. I can't undo the years I missed, but I can make sure no other family has to live what he did. The room went silent. For once, data and strategy couldn't argue with humanity. Finally, Natalie spoke from the corner, her tone measured but warm. I've run projections. Integrating North Star into Polar Grid increases engagement metrics by 40%. The city's already pledging contracts. The public believes in this. A director leaned back slowly. Then perhaps, it's time we did too. The vote was unanimous. When Adrian stepped back into the winter light an hour later, it was with a weight lifted. Not because he'd kept his title, but because the company finally had a soul. That evening, he returned to the brownstone. The smell of tomato soup greeted him first, followed by laughter from the kitchen. Mara stood stirring a pot while Eli sat at the counter, building something out of circuit scraps. "What's that?" Adrian asked, setting down his briefcase. Eli grinned. "A heat sensor. For the shelters. It lights up when the temperature drops too fast." Adrian blinked, genuinely impressed. "You made that?" "Mom helped," Eli said proudly. "She used to fix radiators for neighbors. Said metal talks if you listen." Mara smiled faintly. "It's not pretty, but it works." Adrian crouched beside the device, the soft glow of its indicator light reflecting in his eyes. "So does everything that's built with heart." After dinner, they sat together on the couch. Snow drifted past the window, catching the glow of the street lamps. Mara leaned back, exhausted but content. "I can't believe it," she said quietly. "You actually pulled it off." "It's not done yet," Adrian replied. "The shelters still need funding, the network needs coding, and I need to figure out how to get 12 city councils to agree on anything." She smiled. "Then you'll figure it out." He looked at her, his voice softening. "You always had more faith in me than I did." "I just remembered who you were before the noise," she said. "The man who stayed up all night fixing campus heating for the janitors. You were already building Polar Grid. You just didn't know it." Eli yawned, curling against her side. "Are you two going to get married again?" Mara laughed quietly, covering her mouth. "Again?" Adrian smiled. "We never got the first chance." Eli's eyes were already closing. "You should," he mumbled. "People listen more when you're together." They watched him drift into sleep, his hand resting on the brass compass on the coffee table. The faint reflection of the city's lights shimmered across its surface. Mara whispered, "He's right, you know." Adrian turned toward her, his voice low, uncertain but hopeful. "Then maybe one day." She smiled. "Let's get through one winter first." Outside, the river cracked softly, shifting under the weight of ice. Inside, the air was still, warm and full, like the calm after a vow unspoken but deeply felt. And, for the first time in a decade, Adrian Vale didn't feel haunted by what he'd lost. He felt anchored by what he'd finally chosen to keep. The winter deepened again, but this time the city was ready. Polar Grid's network glowed across the skyline like veins of light, routing warmth where it was needed most. Each node pulsed faintly on the public dashboard. Church basements, transit stations, even old laundromats now doubling as emergency heat hubs. The North Star rooms were alive. From the brownstone balcony, Adrian watched the city breathe through the frost. Plumes of steam rose from vent stacks and chimneys, blurring into the low winter sun. His phone buzzed constantly, news outlets requesting interviews, mayors asking for expansions, but he kept ignoring the calls. Inside, Eli worked on a prototype sensor, his latest obsession. A little brass box with a blinking diode and a motion coil scavenged from a broken toy car. When the air drops below 10 degrees, he explained, the light flashes red. I'm going to make hundreds. Mara smiled from the kitchen table, stitching patches onto a donated pile of blankets. That's my engineer, she said. Adrian laughed softly. You mean our engineer? Eli's face glowed at the word our. You think people will actually use these? He asked. They already are, Adrian said. Polar Grid's analytics show which neighborhoods warm first now. You've made something real. The boy's grin was shy, but wide. Mom said if you build for strangers, you end up finding family. Mara looked up, meeting Adrian's eyes across the room. She might have said that once before. Their laughter filled the brownstone, gentle, human, unguarded. For a moment, winter didn't matter. But outside, in the sharp cold of dawn, reality still had claws. By mid-afternoon, Natalie called. Bad news, she said bluntly. Lang's lawyer filed an injunction against your new funding clause. Claims it violates shareholder rights and constitutes misappropriation of funds for personal redemption. Adrian's stomach tightened. He's still trying to burn what he couldn't build. Exactly, Natalie said. But the judge granted a temporary freeze on the new allocations. Until the court hearing next week, you can't release any funds to North Star rooms. He stared out at the bridge, jaw tight. If I can't fund them, I'll find another way. After hanging up, he turned toward the table. Mara immediately read the tension in his shoulders. What happened? Lang found a way to delay the North Star rollout, he said quietly. Court order, bureaucracy. Her brow furrowed. People rely on those shelters. I know. Eli looked up from his circuit board, eyes wide. What if we lose power again? Adrian forced a reassuring tone. We won't. Polar Grid still runs. We just can't expand yet. But inside, a familiar fear crept up. The fear of watching systems fail while lives depended on them. That night, after Mara and Eli had gone to bed, Adrian sat at the dining table with his laptop. The room was lit only by the small amber glow of the lamp and the reflection of falling snow. He opened the Polar Grid interface, the city's live map pulsing blue and red, every street vane visible. He whispered to himself, if they block the funds, we'll do it off-grid. Within an hour, he'd rerouted an internal test server, setting up a shadow network labeled NSR Community. It was unofficial, invisible to investors, but capable of manually activating backup shelters during blackouts. When Mara came downstairs for water, she found him still working. You're doing it again, she said softly. Doing what? Trying to save the world alone. He rubbed his eyes. It's what I know. She stepped closer, her tone gentle but firm. You don't have to anymore. He turned, looking at her in the half-light. I can't stop. Not while people are freezing. Mara sighed and set her hand on his shoulder. You think warmth is something you give away, but maybe it's something you share. Start here, with us. He looked up at her hand resting on his shoulder, then toward the stairs where Eli's small snores echoed faintly. You really think I can balance both? He asked quietly. You already are, she said. You just don't see it yet. Outside, wind rattled the window. The river below groaned, sheets of ice shifting and cracking under the weight of moving water. It was the same sound as the night he'd found them, fragile, alive, and unstoppable. Adrian closed the laptop slowly. Do you ever think the river remembers? Mara smiled faintly. It remembers everything, especially who comes back. He stood and walked to the window beside her. Together they watched the lights ripple across the water, red, gold, white. In the reflection, they looked like three silhouettes now instead of one. Eli's compass rested on the shelf nearby, its needle quivering slightly even though the air was still. Mara reached for it, pressed it into Adrian's hand, and whispered, Then let it point you home every time you start drifting. He held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "Home," he said softly, and somewhere beneath the ice, the river's current shifted. Quiet, but powerful, carving a new path beneath the frozen surface, as if the city itself had decided to believe in second chances too. The storm returned without warning, an unseasonable blizzard roaring in from the Dakotas, burying highways and shuttering schools across Minnesota. The forecast called it the Valentine's Front, but the news anchor's cheerful tone couldn't hide the danger. Power lines sagged under ice, and Polar Grid's interface glowed crimson across half the map. It hit the same morning Adrian was due in court. By 7:30 a.m., the courthouse parking lot was buried under white. He climbed out of the SUV, wind tearing at his coat, flakes clinging to his dark hair. Natalie hurried beside him, clutching a folder thick with exhibits: Lang's forged memos, the intercepted letters, the proof of Polar Grid's blocked donations. "Half the board's watching live," she said through the gusts. "Lang's lawyers want to drag this into a spectacle. You sure you don't want counsel to speak for you?" Adrian shook his head. "If I can't defend the truth in my own voice, I don't deserve to lead anyone." Inside, the courthouse buzzed with cameras and whispers. The irony wasn't lost on him. Once his name had meant innovation. Now it was a headline that people clicked between weather alerts. The bailiff called the case. Lang v. Polar Grid, et al. Adrian stepped to the stand. Snow streaked the tall windows behind him. The world outside vanishing in white. He could see his reflection faintly in the glass. Blue eyes steady, jaw tight, cufflinks glinting like the last traces of the life he used to guard. Lang's attorney rose first, his tone sharp and smooth. "Mr. Vale's so-called North Star initiative, while admirable in spirit, represents a flagrant misuse of corporate assets. The funds were not approved by shareholders. In effect, he diverted profit for personal redemption, a vanity project rooted in guilt, not governance." The words hit like ice, but Adrian didn't flinch. When his turn came, he spoke simply. "They're wrong. The North Star rooms aren't vanity. They're accountability. When I learned that a boy used our maps to survive a storm our system failed to predict, I realized Polar Grid wasn't about data. It was about people." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "That boy is my son. The woman who raised him did it without help, without warmth, because my company and my choices left them invisible. So I built something better. Not for image, for them, and for everyone else who walks the same frozen streets." A murmur rippled through the gallery. The judge leaned forward. "You're telling this court that the humanitarian redirection of corporate profits was personal responsibility, not personal gain." "Yes," Adrian said steadily. "If humanity disqualifies me from leadership, then maybe leadership needs redefining." He handed over a file. Inside were handwritten letters. Mara's original notes from 11 years ago, her ink faded but clear. "These were intercepted by the plaintiff's firm to protect optics. The company you're accusing me of stealing from was built on their silence." Lang's attorney shifted uncomfortably. Natalie rose next, presenting data from Polar Grid's emergency logs. "Since the North Star prototype activated, 0 hypothermia fatalities have been reported in the designated heat path zones. None. That's not vanity, Your Honor. That's proof of concept and conscience." The courtroom was still. Even the judge exhaled softly, glancing out at the storm clawing against the glass. After hours of arguments and evidence, the decision came swiftly. The injunction was dismissed. The North Star Fund was legally reinstated, and the final statement from the bench echoed through the chamber like a verdict for something larger than law. "Innovation without empathy," the judge said, "is negligence by another name. Case dismissed." Outside, cameras flashed in the swirling snow. Natalie squeezed Adrian's shoulder. "You just changed policy, not just precedent." He managed a tired smile. "Then let's make it mean something." By the time he returned to the brownstone, the storm had turned ferocious. Power flickered along the block, the sky a whirl of silver and black. He burst through the door to find Mara lighting candles, Eli stacking blankets near the couch. "Grid's failing on this side of town," she said quickly. "We heard it on the radio." He checked his phone. She was right. The local substation had gone dark. He opened the Polar Grid interface, saw the red zones creeping closer. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he switched to the hidden NSR community server he'd built weeks ago. Lines of code scrolled across the screen. Backup nodes blinked to life. Across the city, dormant heaters clicked on, shelters glowed blue again, and an automated message pinged out across phones. "North Star paths active. Nearest heat room open." Eli's eyes widened. "That's you, isn't it?" Adrian gave a small nod. "It's us. You helped build this." Through the window they could see faint lights flicker to life along the riverfront, street by street, warmth returning to the city. Mara stepped closer, voice trembling. "You defied a federal order to save strangers." Adrian smiled faintly. "I corrected an oversight." Lightning flashed over the bridge, illuminating their faces in a pulse of white. For a moment, the three of them stood together in the glow, mother, father, son, watching their city thaw itself back to life. When the storm finally began to break hours later, the brownstone still hummed with power. Eli had fallen asleep against Mara's shoulder, the brass compass resting loosely in his hand. Adrian reached out, covering both of them with his own hand. "We made it through another one," he whispered. Mara looked up at him, eyes glinting in the candlelight. "You kept your promise." He brushed a thumb against her cheek, his voice quiet. "I'm not done keeping them." Outside, the snow eased into silence. The bridge lights reflected off the melting river, the same place where once he'd thought everything was lost. Now, it looked like home. By morning, the storm had spent itself. The city gleamed as if scrubbed clean, streets glazed in ice, rooftops glittering under sunlight that fractured like glass. A day earlier, Minneapolis had been one long shiver. Now it looked baptized, reborn. Inside the brownstone, warmth hummed through the vents. The power had held all night, thanks to Adrian's covert activation of the North Star network. Reports flooded social media. Shelters still running. Polar Grid saves Minneapolis again. But Adrian ignored the notifications. He was standing at the window, coffee cooling in his hand, watching the bridge through rising steam. Behind him, Eli was busy arranging objects on the coffee table, 2 small thermometers, the repaired brass compass, and a folded Polar Grid map he'd printed from his tablet. "You know," the boy said seriously, "people online are calling it the night the city stayed warm." Mara looked up from the kitchen, half smiling. "That's better than most headlines we've had." Adrian turned. "They're saying that because of you, Eli." The boy grinned. "Because of us. You built the map. I just followed it." Adrian's gaze softened. "You did more than that. You reminded it what warmth was for." The compass caught a shaft of sunlight, its polished brass glowing like gold. The inscription on the back, freshly engraved the day before, read, "Home is a way through winter." He had planned it quietly, commissioning a local artisan after the court hearing. When he set the compass in Eli's hand now, the boy blinked in surprise. "You fixed it again." "Not just fixed," Adrian said. "Finished." Eli turned it over, tracing the new engraving with his finger. "It's true," he whispered. "We made it home." Mara came closer, setting her mug down beside them. "What about everyone else who's still out there?" she asked gently. "The ones without a compass?" Adrian smiled. "Then we'll give them one." That afternoon, they gathered at the Polar Grid at Riverfront Annex, the company's unused first-floor space that had once been a showroom for investors. It smelled faintly of drywall and dust, the windows streaked with salt from last week's blizzard. Now it would become something new. City officials, shelter directors, and reporters filled the room as Adrian stepped onto the small platform. Eli stood beside him in a clean sweater and winter boots, clutching the compass. Mara stood near the back, quiet pride in her eyes. Thank you for coming, Adrian began. His voice carried clearly, no longer polished for optics but weighted with honesty. 2 weeks ago, a child walked into a storm and changed how this city sees itself. He followed a compass and a map my company built, not knowing both led back here to me. He paused, scanning the crowd. I failed that child once, and by extension, I failed this city. But failure's only final if you stop moving. So today, Polar Grid is taking a new path. He gestured to a schematic on the screen behind him, a living city map glowing with connected dots. This building will become the first North Star Clinic, a 24-hour warming center, medical hub, and tech classroom where we'll train teens to maintain the very systems that protect them. And starting next month, every major city we serve will have one too. Murmurs spread through the audience. Surprise, admiration, relief. This isn't charity, Adrian continued. It's course correction. Technology got us this far. Humanity will take us the rest of the way. Then he turned toward Eli. And the person who named our first working map, the one who saw warmth where we only saw data, is standing right here. Meet Eli Vale, North Star's first cartographer. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then rising. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned forward. Eli froze for a moment, wide-eyed, then turned toward his mother, who nodded through tears. Adrian crouched beside him and whispered, "You earned this, son. You lit the way." After the event, the three of them lingered by the glass windows overlooking the river. Workers had already begun clearing space for construction. The sunlight hit the ice just right, scattering prisms across their reflections. "It's strange," Mara said quietly. "All those years, I used to look at this bridge and think it was where everything ended." "It's where everything began," Adrian said. "We just didn't know it yet." She turned to him, eyes glimmering. "And what about us, Adrian? Where do we begin?" He hesitated, the question landing heavier than the applause still echoing behind them. "I can't promise we'll be perfect," he said. "I can only promise I'll keep showing up. Every morning, every storm." Her gaze softened. That might be enough. Eli interrupted them with a grin. "Can we build another North Star Clinic near the playground by the river? Kids get cold too." Adrian smiled. "We can build it anywhere you draw it." That evening, they walked home together. The streets sparkled under lamplight, and snow crunched softly beneath their boots. A few pedestrians recognized Adrian and called out thanks. He waved shyly, unused to gratitude that wasn't measured in profit margins. When they reached the brownstone, Eli ran ahead to open the door for them. "Home," he declared proudly. Adrian and Mara followed him inside. The air was warm, golden from the low light of evening. She hung her coat, watching him move through the familiar space, the way he loosened his tie, rolled his sleeves, poured water for their son. He wasn't the man she remembered from years ago. He was quieter, more human. The frost finally thawed from his edges. Eli placed the compass on the mantel, where it caught the last of the day's light. "It's pointing this way now," he said, turning to them. "Straight at us." Mara smiled. "Then I guess we're true north." Adrian looked at them both, the woman who never stopped believing and the boy who brought him back through snow and silence, and felt something settle inside him, calm and irrevocable. For the first time, he didn't need the compass to find his way. He was already there. A month passed, and winter began to loosen its grip. The snow no longer came in fury, only in soft whispers that blanketed the city gently before melting by noon. Minneapolis breathed easier now. Streets alive again. Bridges busy. Shelters full, but no longer desperate. The North Star network stretched across the map like constellations. Each light representing warmth restored, a room opened, a life saved. Reports showed what Adrian had only hoped for: hypothermia deaths at 0, energy waste down by half, and more than 500 volunteers trained through Polar Grid's new outreach program. In the brownstone by the river, life found rhythm. Mornings meant the smell of coffee and frost on the window. Evenings meant homework at the table, soup simmering, laughter echoing in corners that used to be silent. Adrian sat by the fire that evening, sleeves rolled, reading Eli's latest science project. Heat maps and heartbeats, how warmth travels in cities. The boy had drawn diagrams of streets and circuits side by side, with a note at the bottom in crooked handwriting. Sometimes data saves lives, sometimes love does. He smiled, blinking away the sting in his eyes. Mara came from the kitchen, her hair tied back, carrying 2 mugs. "He's got your brain," she said softly, "and a better compass." Adrian chuckled. "He has your heart." She sank beside him on the couch, their knees touching, the kind of quiet closeness that didn't need grand gestures. "The clinic opens tomorrow," she said. "You ready for the ribbon cutting?" "I'd rather let Eli cut it," he replied. "He deserves it." Mara tilted her head, smiling. "You really meant it when you said, 'We'll build warmth into the system.'" "I meant it because of you," he said simply. A soft knock came at the door. When Adrian opened it, 2 volunteers from the new clinic stood there, bundled in heavy coats, faces red from cold. "Mr. Vale," one said, holding up a clipboard, "the heater at the river shelter's down again. We've got spare parts but need your override key to access the hub." Adrian glanced at Mara, then nodded. "Give me 10 minutes. I'll meet you there." "I'm coming," Eli said, already grabbing his coat. Mara looked hesitant. "It's freezing." He smiled. "Then we'll fix that." Minutes later, the 3 of them stepped into the glittering night. Snow had begun to fall again, slow, silver flakes drifting through lamplight. The city hummed softly around them, generators whirring, buses sighing, the faint buzz of power lines overhead. When they reached the shelter near the bridge, a small crowd waited. Volunteers, families, children with mittened hands and red noses. The heater stood silent, encased in frost. Adrian crouched, tools in hand, while Eli held the flashlight steady. "It's like surgery," the boy said. "Exactly," Adrian said, twisting a connector. "We're restarting a heartbeat." The generator sputtered once, twice, and then roared back to life. A cheer went up, the glow of heat spilling into the cold night air. Someone handed out hot cocoa. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Mara watched from a few feet away, her scarf whipping in the wind. When Adrian turned, their eyes met. Years of silence, loss, and longing distilled into one simple exchange. He walked toward her through the snow, every step soft, deliberate. "You still think success is about distance?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not anymore. It's about staying long enough to feel the thaw." Her lips parted, her breath fogging in the air. "And us?" Adrian smiled faintly. "We've already survived the hardest season. The rest is weather." She reached out, her gloved hand finding his. For a moment they stood like that, surrounded by the hum of warmth, the laughter of strangers, the glow of the bridge arching above them. Eli ran toward them, holding up the compass proudly. "It's still pointing home," he shouted. Adrian lifted him into his arms. "That's because it knows where we belong." Snowflakes drifted across their faces, melting into skin, hair, and wool. The air smelled of smoke and cocoa, of second chances and steel warmed by sunlight. The city lights reflected on the river below, painting gold streaks across the black current. Somewhere far off, a church bell tolled the hour. And for the first time in 11 long winters, Adrian Vale didn't see loss when he looked at snow. He saw promise. He looked at Mara and Eli, his compass and his map, and whispered, "Home isn't where the storm ends. It's where we keep each other warm." The boy smiled, the woman's eyes glistened, and the night, quiet, forgiving, endless, closed around them like a vow. The wind rose once more, but it wasn't cruel anymore. It carried laughter, the hum of machines, the pulse of a city that had learned, finally, how to hold on. And under the glow of the Stone Arch Bridge, 3 shadows walked hand in hand through the falling snow, heading home.